Welcome to this episode of the Doug Sanquist podcast, where interested is interesting, and interesting people share their stories. And hopefully, we find out what their biography is along the way. Today, I am sitting down with Dr. Alexis Cowan, and Dr. Cowan is a PhD biochem. Is that right?
Well, it was molecular biology,
Okay.
but I mean,
Degree in
not
biochem,
really.
right? Then molecular
Uh,
biology.
yes, biochem undergrad, then molecular biology, but I was actually studying metabolism and like more chemistry than anything. But
I gotcha. And then you had a fairly significant like weight loss journey like as a teenager, right? Which is pretty
yep,
significant, right? Like lost
yep.
100 pounds.
Also 100 pounds, gained an eating disorder and IBS.
Yeah, so
But
like how does
yeah.
that like that's pretty interesting. Like how does that like actually um and then that led to like metabolism to like metabolism research and like trying to figure out like what's the cause of these things and how they all happen, right? Is that kind of how
Kind
that what
of.
led you down that road?
Well, no, actually. So my entire let's say career has kind of just been a series of happy accidents, I would say. Growing up, so the reason I even had the weight loss to begin with, or had to have the weight loss to begin with, was because uh at least at this point, this is my conceptualization of it. In first grade, I had chronic recurring strep throat. I got pulled out of school because it kept coming back. I was on antibiotics for probably like 6 months straight. There was also mold in my home, black mold. I remember distinctly the smell of standing water, and there was also carpet in the bathroom.
Mhm.
It's like very
Nice.
much a 50s home. My
Right.
grandfather built the house. And it was a great house in theory, but like there was just some issues there. And during that time where I was homeschooled for like a year and a half, my weight exploded. When I went back to school in third grade, I was like double my classmates in weight. And then that continued spiraling up through like sophomore year of high school. I maxed out somewhere around 270 pounds, had a whole heap of skin issues, respiratory issues, just not healthy in any way. And so I decided to join a gym and start counting calories, and I was eating like maybe 1,500 calories a day, and I was working out for like 2 hours a day. So my net calories were probably like under 500
Mhm.
calories. Lost 100 pounds over the course of a year. And then after you lose that amount of weight, it's like the worst thing that could happen to you is gaining it back. So I feel like that's where like the control, because I had bulimia basically. So I wanted to have
Mhm.
my cake and eat it too. And I had that issue for like 7 years post weight loss. And then a couple years after the weight loss, also developed IBS, which actually started when I was working night shifts at a chemical company. I was doing an internship there, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I would work a night shift. This was like maybe 4 days a week or something. And then right after the night shift, under these awful fluorescent lights, I would go to the gym for like an hour and a half. And then from the gym, I would go to school and I would take classes till like 3 p.m. And then I would sleep for maybe like 4 hours and I would do it all over again. And I was
Wow.
crushing stimulants during this time. I was crushing sugar-free energy drinks. I was taking New Vigil. I was dabbling with Adderall at the time, and my gut just got destroyed,
Mhm.
destroyed. And so it's like it's no surprise now, knowing what I know, that that would have happened at that point of time. But I didn't put two and two together at the time. At the time, I was basically trying to figure out what in my diet was causing it. And as it turned out, when I removed dairy from my diet, my symptoms did go away.
Mhm.
My guess is that during that time of extreme stress on my body, circadian and otherwise, I was basically developing like hyperpermeability in my gut that was sensitizing to certain food antigens that I was eating that maybe I already had a slight predisposition to having issues with, microbiome wise, and then also just like immune antigen wise. And so when I removed dairy, that seemed to alleviate the issues. But I will say, actually, when I did remove dairy, I was also transitioning off of that night shift situation. So there's probably a
Mhm.
multitude of factors that were contributing to that healing process. I was mortified at the standard centralized medical response to my issues, where they basically said like you can go on immunotherapy and that's all we can do for you. And I was just like,
Mhm.
what? Like that's literally all you can do. I'm literally like 21 at the time, I'm not going on an
Right.
immunotherapy, and I didn't always have this issue. So why aren't they trying to actually figure out why this is happening? Nobody asked me about, the way I was living my life or what I was eating or my light environment, certainly not that.
Right.
So anyway, the IBS and the eating disorder were more so my introduction into my healing journey, although the weight loss kind of catalyzed that as well. But I'd always been a pretty curious person, and I was actually in culinary school right after high school. And then I ended up having a really powerful LSD experience at the college that I transferred to, and then I had this great experience there that made me want to actually go there full time. And my best friend had gone there as well, and so I transferred there, and I ended up going into biochemistry and also studying math. And then from there, I went back to pharma. Well, I went to pharma for the first time, Bristol Myers Squibb. I worked there for like 10 months, and then I went back to the chemical company to make some real money for a couple months before going back to school at Princeton. Um, and the only reason I went to Princeton was because I could commute there. I was like, it's pretty close, so it's like I could go there, and I had no idea like what labs were there. I didn't have any conceptualization of this is a good fit for me. I just figured it, I mean, it's Princeton, I'll
Hmm.
probably find something.
Right.
But I really struggled to find a lab to join at first. Like my first two rotations in the molecular biology department were not a good fit at all. Went into my third rotation feeling totally demoralized. But it ended up being a great fit, despite the fact that I had to work with animals, which was a huge like line in the sand for me. I did not want to work with animals because I'm a huge
Mhm.
animal lover. I didn't want to have to
Right.
like hurt them. But anyways, that ended up being a whole other thing too. By the time I graduated, my boss trusted my data over everybody else's in the
Hmm.
animal, like the metabolomics data, because I would literally like pray for the mice before I had to kill them. And I was so loving towards them because they're
Hmm.
adorable. And I feel so bad about what's happening. And I know a lot of other people who are really cruel towards the animals, and it's
Right.
so wrong. And it really influences the data, especially in metabolism, because even a mild stress response is going to change glucose and fat metabolism. And so, um, the more you treat the animals in a like a loving and an ethical way, the better your data quality is too. So I think that's often not discussed. But anyway, so then from Princeton, I graduated, started my business, working with individuals. I was very focused on the microbiome at that time. I thought
Hmm.
that was the most important thing.
Right.
And
We have an interesting corollary too. I mean, I have celiac
yeah,
disease, and so
oh yeah.
I was told when I got my diagnosis. This is interesting. Back to your story about at my diagnosis, I'd done like 2 weeks of like PubMed searches on like my own disease, right? And I show up at my appointment, and my doctor basically said, "Well, you know more about it than I do, so have a good day." I mean, and I mean, like I'm a dentist, and I mean, it's like I totally get like how people get so disillusioned with like their healthcare providers because like I was like given nothing. I was like given no like well, pat on the back, you know more than I do, so have a good day, So I mean, I went down the whole rabbit hole of microbiome and the whole I've done all the tests on myself. I've done all of the protocols. I've done all of those things. And so it's very interesting that, you went down that rabbit hole too. And like actually you did a postdoc in the microbiome, right?
Well, it was a microbiome lab. I was working on a tech development project, basically a multi-omics imaging project where we're trying to look at, in a single tissue slice, can we establish the metabolomics and the transcriptomics of that single slice? So ultimately, we would want to do that and like profile patient tumors, for example, and then be able to make more targeted treatment approaches, let's say, towards that individual tumor by being able to profile it more thoroughly. So I wasn't working on the microbiome there, but interestingly, even though I was super interested in the microbiome and I really got into that from Joel Green's work in the immunity code, um, which kind of blew my mind. He was like my first Jack in some
Mhm.
ways, except
Right.
he's like all self-taught. He doesn't have
Right.
all like the acclaim that Jack has, but really got like my juices flowing mentally, and made me realize even among the microbiome people, like I disagreed with a lot of what they were doing. Like for example, probiotics. So I think probiotics, to this day, I feel this way that first of all, it's like a drop in the ocean. Even if you're taking a couple billion CFUs, there's trillions of microbes in your gut. It's literally a drop in the ocean. And if you're not creating the internal terrain that's required for those microbes to actually colonize the gut, then at best, you're just like pooping your money away. And at worst, you could be creating imbalances that you didn't intend. Because I think the idea that we even know what a healthy versus an unhealthy microbiome looks like is absolutely insane when we're thinking about specific levels of specific bacteria.
Hmm.
I think we don't have that level of understanding whatsoever. We kind of have a sense that maybe more diversity is better than less diversity. We have a sense that maybe more bifidobacteria is better than less. But on the front of basically all the other microbes, more isn't necessarily better. And in general, like in life, more isn't always better. There's supposed to be a balance. It's an ecosystem. The gut
Right.
ecosystem is an environment that there's a lot of interplay between different microbes. They're sharing chemicals, they're sharing genetic material as well. And thinking that like, oh, this group is bad and this one is good is a very rudimentary way to think about the microbiome. And I think that's typically the approach that's used in in people who peddle probiotics. Because, basically the idea is that we want more of these because more is better. But in the example of Akkermansia, so elevated Akkermansia levels are associated with Parkinson's disease. So more Akkermansia isn't necessarily better. Like we don't know that. So I'm much more into now cultivating a healthy microbiome through like three pillars. One, exposure to natural environments, which gives you innate exposure to biodiversity, which
Mhm.
can then increase the chance that certain microbes will seed over others. Leveraging the sun, because sunlight via UVB light stimulates the gut skin axis and actually helps to increase gut microbial diversity
Mhm.
just inherently from that exposure, which is really powerful. I'm sure there's also effects of like direct red and infrared light stimulation of the gut via like coming through the skin of the abdomen as well that we need to study. And then third would be like the postbiotics and the prebiotics. The prebiotics being the molecules that feed the microbes, such as fibers and polyphenols and things like human milk oligosaccharides that are really potent prebiotics for bifidobacteria. And then also the postbiotics, which are the molecules that are made by microbes in the gut or in fermented foods, for example. So butyrate would be a postbiotic as an example. Urolithin A is a postbiotic, and it does seem like there's pretty good evidence to support that postbiotics from fermented foods or, maybe in supplement form as well, can also help to shape the microbiome more successfully than taking a probiotic. In the Sonnenberg lab, they showed that consuming fermented foods had a bigger impact on microbiome diversity than consuming probiotics
Hmm.
or just a fiber rich diet. So
Mhm.
I think consuming the fermented foods, getting out into nature, getting your skin in the sun is like, a great way to optimize the microbiome. And it's also pretty simple. It doesn't require any fancy supplements or tools. It's really just kind of getting back to the basics.
Right. And technically, I mean, according to like, is it who's the guy? Like, infrared light will go through clothes, so you don't even have to
Yes.
like. You can just be outside in nature on a walk, like, and
Yep.
get the IR and the NIR
Scott
light.
Zimmerman.
Yeah, Scott Zimmerman. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how did you figure out? How did you get from the microbiome to like, circadian biology? What was your story there? Like, because it's a fair. I mean, most of us all have our own little. We all get hit with it right in the face. Because I mean, I went from like, trying to figure out metabolic health to like, maybe that it doesn't. It matters, but maybe it doesn't matter as much as you think it does.
Yeah, well, I feel like metabolic health is like a second order issue because if your light environment is crap, then your metabolic health is going to be crap. But if you just focus on your metabolic health without considering the factors that are shaping your metabolism, that's a problem because then we're trying to
Right.
basically biohack the system without actually supporting it at a foundational level. But the way that I found like circadian light biology and Uncle Jack's work was so actually I don't remember who sent it to me, but I had like a business that I'd been building all of 2022. And at some point in March, no, it was April of 2023. So I'd been back in my postdoc. Circadian biology had been on my radar since grad school. A lot of Sachin Panda's work, for example. But for whatever reason, I never had the sense that, like, wow, this is the most important thing that I'm not thinking about. Like, it just wasn't explained in a way that really
Hmm.
conferred that. So I was doing my postdoc and some random person on Instagram just DM'd me and they sent me the Tetragrammaton episode with Jack and Huberman.
Hmm.
And they were like, what do you think of this? And I just decided to listen to it. And my entire life changed overnight. Like
Right.
it was literally like a portal into a different life. So
Right.
my jaw was basically on the floor the entire two parts of that podcast. I listened to it like 5 times in a row.
Hmm.
Overnight I started changing my pattern, so I would basically just work outside all day. I would block blue light at night, and now suddenly I'm going to bed early and waking up early just naturally, and I always thought I was a night owl. Like I
Hmm.
never thought I would be the person who would be like that, not in a
Right.
million years. And that actually made me reflect a lot on chronotypes and how I really think chronotypes are a manifestation of the modern world because naturally, like you're not going to have the artificial light to keep you awake at night. You're just going to go to bed earlier.
Right.
So you don't really have much of an option. So Uh, that was huge. And then from, changing my whole life in the span of like a few days, I started feeling really a lot better. I had way more energy and my sleep quality improved so much. Prior to that, I'd been going to bed at let's say like 2 a.m. and waking up at like
Mhm.
10 a.m. And I would always struggle to get to sleep and I would always wake up actually around sunrise naturally and I would just struggle and toss and turn to go back to sleep.
Trying to get
Um,
6 hours or 7 hours, whatever it is, right?
yeah, well, I would have only been getting like 4 hours of sleep if I actually woke up to sunrise at that point. So
Right.
I'm a big sleeper, so I always I love my sleep. And then after, literally after one day of making these changes, my sleep was amazing. My energy was amazing. And I was like, wow, there's really something to this. And I had also started looking into the literature around the claims and the statements Jack was making in that podcast. And I was just like blown away that all of this is like sitting right here. And a lot of this literature is like old, it's like decades old. And I'm like, how did I never get
Mhm.
exposed to this? It's kind of appalling that nobody's talking about this in centralized science at supposedly one of like the top research institutes in the world at
Right.
Princeton. Nobody is talking about this. It's not on anyone's radar. And so I went down the rabbit hole myself. I also ended up changing my entire business and my messaging online and everything to reflect this new knowledge that I had received that I downloaded. And yeah, the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, so it's really it's interesting when you kind of like you research it and you think you're on the right path and then you just it hits you right in the face and you're just like, wow, like I really need to like adjust how I do things. So, I mean, for me, I mean, I found it last about a year ago, well, no, 9 months ago, and I've literally basically stopped taking every supplement in
Yep.
about 2 weeks, and I'm like, I don't need this anymore. I'm just gonna go see the sunrise. I'm gonna get in the sun during the day, and I'm gonna block the light at night. And I mean, it's like it's pretty remarkable, like how just the simple things you can actually do to actually make yourself feel better. So let's kind of get into like what is your protocol right now? Like what are your top three main things that you took from Uncle Jack's work to make you to help you out?
Yeah, I mean, this wouldn't maybe necessarily be one of the recommendations that he makes directly, though somewhat. So I would say, broadly speaking, that a lot of the issues people have are from things that we're actively doing and not things that we're not doing. Though there are some cases like not blocking blue light at night and not seeing the sunrise, not getting outside. Those are definitely big things. But what I more so mean is like taking a lot of dubious supplements and like just trying to do too many things at one time. It really creates a lot of complexity and it makes it really hard to understand what's working for you, what's not. Is anything working, or is it like a multifactorial thing that is, leading to your symptom, let's say, or whatever is going on? Really just simplifying your life and getting back to the basics. Like that was probably the biggest general takeaway that I got from
Yeah.
Jack. And also it ends up saving you a lot of money
Hmm.
not buying this stuff and instead like basically what I've been recommending to clients, what I've been doing myself is spending money curating an environment that I can enjoy, like sitting outside, like a nice patio set and just making it
Hmm.
like aesthetic out here. I got my cold plunge behind me, the Morosco.
Hmm.
And so just creating a space outside that I can really enjoy spending time in that's functional. And that it doesn't allow me to make the excuse like, oh, I shouldn't be out here or whatever because I need X, Y, or Z. No, I mean, there's like plenty of solutions available for like working on computers outside to reduce glare and just to make the space enjoyable to spend time in. So
Yeah, I
that was
think
probably the biggest thing.
yeah, I think so many people I mean unfortunately, I mean I don't want to throw all the physicians under the bus because I mean we need them. There are lots of really really good physicians. We need dentists, we need centralized clinicians, but I think so many people are disenfranchised, so they just, look up the latest, ideas from whoever they're following on what social media thing. And so, people, in my world, I mean, I had heard about like circadian rhythms and people were talking about like, if you want to get good rest, block light at night, wear blue blockers, leave your phone off before you go to bed, all and as a centralized dentist, I mean, you first hear these things and you're like, okay, yeah, okay, that makes a little bit of sense, but I mean, there's so many other things that could actually potentially cause help somebody to not sleep, and it was a leap for me to actually get to like, okay, so maybe that actually is the first order effect, right? That those things are the first order effect rather than the size of somebody's nose or the size of somebody's tongue, or and that all these things could be potentially related. And so, I mean, I think that's and really when you think about like airway disease or anything like that, like in my world, it's like, okay, so maybe the circadian biology actually does actually, is the first order effect of these things, not something else, not like glucose or food or extra fat or all these things are all kind of related, layered on top of circadian biology and like what we do. And I don't think people understand the effect of blue light to the biology.
Yeah, I don't think it's being studied with enough rigor either, and I'm hoping to change that. So I'm meeting with a major
Hmm.
potential funder on Tuesday to discuss funding the light lab, that I'm actually hoping to build from scratch. Like somebody said, "Oh, I hope you build the lab at Princeton," but actually, the more I think about it, my partner works in pharma and he's built out multiple labs, just like in
Hmm.
industry, and we would love to just build out our own facility completely. And so it's completely like not part of an institution. I think there may be some red tape to get through to do that, but I think it's ultimately going to be worth it to not have whatever restrictions are in place by having your lab on a campus, let's say, and then maybe just collaborating with labs on campus if we need to do animal work or something like that. So I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit questions that we need to ask about modern light, about our LEDs, our screens, about non-native EMFs as well as another form of
Hmm.
light that's not getting enough study. I think we're in just major denial societally about the effects of non-native EMFs on mitochondria, on health, on cancer, on, a lot of the diseases that are plaguing us. And when you start learning about the light story and you learn about non-native EMFs as a form of light that's just non-visible, you can
Right.
really start to see, especially when you also start understanding that mitochondria are basically EMF antennas. They're looking for the EMFs in the environment. You can
Hmm.
really begin to see that non-native EMFs can create a lot of decoherence in the system and basically blunt the ability of your mitochondria to adequately or optimally sense the environment. And so I think, that's something we really need to put more research dollars into because it's something that's affecting and impacting everybody at this point. There's really no getting away from it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think many people have a hard time understanding that, the light, sitting outside right now, like the light is a waveform, right? It comes from the sun as a wave. And so it's a visible spectrum, there's a non-visible and visible spectrum of light that comes in. And so um I think people don't it's both what we see and it's actually has a physics to it, so it's kind of like it's energy just like that's in your microwave oven, just at a different spectrum, right? And so our
Yeah.
body is actually just resonating with whatever signals are coming from that light, and they hit, it's all connected in some way, right?
Yeah, I mean, our eyes will fool us. And I actually think it's really interesting to think about the fact that UV light and infrared light are both in non-visible parts of the spectrum for us as humans. Other species of animals can see those wavelengths of light. But I think it's super interesting to consider the fact that UV and infrared light are also arguably the most important parts of the light spectrum for the human being, for the
Mhm.
human body. They're really these essential nutrients that allow our bodies to be adequately powered up, let's say. And so I think it's interesting to consider that the reason that we can't see UV and infrared light is because they're basically quantized to our system so that if we could see them, we would muck around with it and we would mess the system up essentially.
Right.
But of course, evolution or, whatever you want to call it, didn't consider the fact that we would develop technology that would allow us to see and muck with it. So
Right. And then you have the whole like, UV light causing skin cancer and UV light related to all these things from the basically a few studies that were
yeah.
done in the labs, right? That just showed. And we never UV light from the sun is what, 5%, 5 or so% of the spectrum of the midday sun, I think.
Yeah, it depends on the time of year, but like maybe in the summertime it could be like less than 10%, but it's still a very minority part of the spectrum compared to the red and infrared, which is over 50%. And all of those studies in the cancer, the etiology of cancer with regards to UV light shows that, UV light in isolation can potentially create cancers over time, but we never encounter UV light in isolation. It's always with an abundance of red and infrared light. And the red and infrared light allows our bodies to actually effectively assimilate that UV light in a productive way that allows us to basically harness the photonic energy of the sun, assuming some other givens that people are breaking as well, things like adequate DHA status, which is really important for harnessing photonic energy, things like avoiding artificial blue light and non-native EMFs, which both harm the mitochondria on your surfaces, which are important for the melanation response in response to UV light. So there are a lot of things that modern humans are doing that are basically setting them up to be able to more so burn and get damage from the sun versus actually being able to be nourished by it.
Yes. So you mentioned something about like the mitochondria being like, light sensing organelles. Like, why don't we like, I mean, in my whole, training, I mean, I think I may have learned about a mitochondria like a few times. And like, why isn't this like, since like they're literally the powerhouse of every single of all the cells. I mean, they're not in red blood cells, but they're in most other cells, and like they're literally the energy source. Like, why is there? It appears like there's just so little research done on these powerhouse powerhouses.
Yeah, I mean, Jack talks about a lot, and it's so true that we literally don't study the mitochondrial genome, even though it's the most plastic and the most impactful on the state and quality of cells and tissues as a whole. There's even research out of Doug Wallace's lab at CHOP showing that essentially mitochondrial heteroplasmy, which is enhanced mutation rates among the mitochondria, drives changes in the epigenetics and mutation burden in the nuclear genome. So if we're thinking about cancer, like in the modern centralized science, it's often touted as this genetic disease. But then we're not actually looking at the mitochondria that can be driving the mutations that can create the disease of cancer. And having said that, though, there is a lot of evidence showing that mitochondria are dysfunctional in the context of cancer, but they're not quite bridging the gap there between like what's actually causal and thinking about mitochondrial dysfunction as this causal factor in virtually all of our chronic disease states, whether it's cancer, autoimmune disease, neurodegeneration, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. It's basically
Sleep,
just which tissue is affected.
right? Yeah, we don't really think about the whole like. I mean, there are specific like mitochondrial like diseases that we
Yep.
actually know about, but we don't actually put the those connections together, right? I mean, we don't actually
Yep.
we can't seemingly make the actual connection there because we don't. I don't think we actually are able to at the current state of our the system. We're not able to get there, right?
Yeah, and that's especially the truth because we're not looking at the light aspect of mitochondria, not only as light detectors, but light emitters as well. So UV biophotons and infrared light being produced from mitochondria that actually helps support the cellular environment to support the structuring of the metabolic water, the deuterium depleted metabolic water within cells that actually facilitates metabolism. We're so often taught about mitochondria make ATP, and ATP
Mhm.
is the energy currency, but that's not actually what's happening at all. ATP doesn't create free energy like we're taught in school. ATP essentially changes the shape of proteins that allows water to go into these new pockets of the protein that it couldn't access otherwise. And the water is actually what's facilitating the metabolism. That charge separated exclusion zone structured water is a battery that powers metabolism. It powers enzymatic reactions. That's actually what's doing the work. The ATP is just helping to unlock proteins to make them more accessible to the water. And so I think there's just a lot of disconnect within centralized science about the role of water within cells, the role of light within cells, and how those two communicate together as well, and how the light influences the structure of the water, which then can influence the metabolism and the actual functions at like a very basic level.
Right. And it's like, the whole idea behind like, you know, free radicals and like that's, like how do they work inside the cell? And, we we typically think of free radicals being bad, right? We think of them as
Yeah.
like, we're going to take our vitamin supplements because we want to like, you know, quash the free radicals that are causing aging. And so it's just it's an interesting like how we've like when you kind of dig into like the role of the mitochondria and like how I know your shirt like make mitochondria great again. In fact, I actually have mine sitting here too. I
Heck
actually
yeah.
grabbed it, so I got mine here too. Like,
Yeah. Let's go.
so I mean, it's really and it's pretty wild to like I wish I mean I'm learning. I'm trying to get there, but I don't it's going to take me a while to kind of figure it out. But I don't it's a heavy lift, I think, for centralized scientists and centralized physicians to actually get into the mitochondrial world. Like, when we see, patients who come from centralized doctors and they have this diagnosis and that diagnosis, and, really it's a chronic disease, right? I mean, our only answer for chronic disease is pretty much just management at this point in the
Hmm.
centralized world. And I don't think it's a heavy lift to try to get somebody to kind of get outside of that paradigm, right?
I mean, yeah, I think it's mostly a heavy lift because our doctors and our scientists are all burdened and saddled with so much debt that it's literally like draining their life force and they're just focused on getting by each day. There's
Mm-hmm.
very few that, most people come out of medical school and grad school with mountains of debt because in the case of medical school, you are actively paying like 200 to $400,000 for however many years you're there. In grad school, you are getting a stipend, but at the same time, that stipend is only just enough to like live. Basically, most grad students, at least in my case, it was the case that I had to use a bunch of credit cards just to actually like because I buy good food. I'm not going to compromise my food quality. I have a certain standard of living that I have to maintain, and that's just how it is. And so I went into debt for that, and now I'm still in the process of paying that off. But when you saddle people down with debt, they become a bit desperate to just be able to make enough money to just get by.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll get comfortable, let's say. So, for example, working in pharma, let's say you make like $120,000 a year in this financial climate, that actually isn't very much at all, but
Mm-hmm.
let's say it's enough to pay your monthly bills and, just to be comfortable, but not great. People
Mm-hmm.
are going to be scared to leave that position because there's a lot of unknowns. Like, I'm fine. Like, I don't need to necessarily do anything greater. I don't need to think out of the box and what that could mean. Because when you start thinking out of the box in the centralized model, that could make your day-to-day life really challenging when you see that you're like going against your values now and like
Mm-hmm.
having to really reconcile a lot of cognitive dissonance that's present. So I think it's easier to avoid that oftentimes than to actually confront it and do something about it, especially when there's like always regulatory bodies and middlemen between you and your patients or between,
Mm-hmm.
between people essentially. There's not many direct connections to be had, especially in the medical field, unless, you're working with somebody who has a private practice. But even in that case, there's still like medical boards that are in between you and your
Mm-hmm.
ability to treat your patient. And so I think the middlemen are a real problem. And I think it's just overall easier to kind of fall in line versus actually ask difficult questions. And we saw that. And that's why Jack talks about like COVID being a compliance test. Well, like over 80% of people complied, which is pretty dang scary when
Mm-hmm.
you consider the fact that a lot of these are like smart people. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of my colleagues at Princeton, like
Mm-hmm.
they're supposed to be the smartest people. And yet all of them were like, even when I just questioned, like, oh, I don't know how I feel about these vaccines because like they didn't even have enough time to test them. They're like so new. And I asked that question, and my colleagues there were like, ooh, yikes, like you're asking that. And like
Mm-hmm.
everybody was like, I can't wait to get in line for my jab. And I felt like I was in this like dystopian reality where like nobody's
Mm-hmm.
asking questions and you're supposed to be scientists.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Insane.
yeah. I mean, I took two. I mean, I'm not happy about it, but I mean, you basically had no choice. I mean, in certain situations, I mean, it was very difficult to not to say no. I mean, half my patients would have not come in, and half my patients didn't care. So, I mean, it's you make a decision based on your own livelihood, right? I mean, these are all, unfortunately, that's the choice. I hope we never have to make that decision again,
Well,
honestly.
we probably will, but I think at least more people are awake to the fact that that was a mass manipulation. And uh also this is where the Bitcoin conversation comes in with that Jack often talks about, and that is that if your financial, like your livelihood depends on you making a specific
Hmm.
decision that's kind of dictated to you, then you're probably going to make it. Versus if you have financial sovereignty, you can tell them like, no, fuck you, I'm not doing it, and you'll be fine because you
Hmm.
have that kind of cushion to fall back on in that event. So I think hopefully, the pandemic and everything that went down then is a wake up call to people to like try to curate and engineer sovereignty in your life in different ways so that when this does happen again, because we should assume
It
that's going to
probably
happen again.
will. Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
yeah, probably
It,
will, that we have a plan in that case.
hmm
And at the very least, the plan should be just lie. Don't go against your body, just lie about it. It's
Yeah,
fine.
no, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, I really think ultimately the thing that gets in the way for most clinicians is like, I mean, circadian biology, teaching somebody about their circadian biology doesn't cost you anything, right? It shouldn't.
Yep.
There's no if it's a prescription that you can go do yourself, right? And so if you can, if you feel better, that's great. If you don't, then you have to go down another road. But I mean, I think that's what's challenging, because it's like, how do you monetize it? And you can't, which is actually the beauty behind it all. Because, like, if you have a chronic something going on and this is something you want to try, I mean, and if it works, great. I think that's kind of that's how I think about it. So one of the things that um I never actually heard about POMC until I heard Jack talk about it. So I mean, POMC is such an interesting it's a gene, and we all have it. Some of us need more of it. Um what's really interesting is, like, when I found Jack, I was actually really into the metabolic health thing. So I was really into the sugar thing. I was really into and then once you realize that blue light, or straight blue light from your phone, through the POMC gene, actually does create, like, sugar, and it actually does cause glucose spikes. And so, I mean, it I do remember waking up at, like, in the middle of the night with the CGM on, and a bad habit, I would always pick up my phone and, like, look at my phone at 2 in the morning, and, like, there were times when my blood sugar would spike at 2 or 3 in the morning, and the only thing I can think of is, it's either, something happening during my sleep or just looking at my phone. And so, it's just an N of one, and I don't, I'm not sure that it matters to anybody else, but I did notice it myself. I definitely don't look on my phone anymore in the middle of the night. But it is a wild, I don't think many people are even aware that, like, people are actually getting fat from their light sources, which is it's a hard one to actually get people to understand.
Yeah, so I think the idea of losing energy to your environment as the primary feature of obesity is a really important way to think about it. And one way to kind of conceptualize that is if you take, so the biophoton research shows that if you take a bunch of people who have chronic illness, let's say they have diabetes, or they're really old, or they have autoimmune disease or cancer, and you look at the biophotons emitted from their body, they have a whole bunch of biophotons being emitted.
Hmm.
And if you look at healthy people, they don't. They're essentially they're making the light, but they're retaining it and using that photonic energy productively. And so the way you can think about the biophoton emission and release from the body is that is actively losing it. You're actively losing energy from the body and from the system that's no longer able to productively do work in the system. And so from a mitochondrial standpoint, I think we can really think about obesity as like a failure, like the beginnings of a failure of the mitochondrial engines.
Hmm.
And if you can't burn what's coming in, then you're going to store it. That's just
Right.
going to happen. And we know that blue light can directly impair mitochondrial function on the skin, eyes, and proximal brain regions, which, are tightly involved in the control of body composition via modulating appetite and energy expenditure. And in a healthy body where that hypothalamus is being provided with the proper light inputs from sunlight and then darkness at night, the hypothalamus can easily, if you overconsume calories one day, it can easily just, it can suppress your appetite and it can increase your energy expenditure so that you can then, kind of burn off that excess. I don't think obesity is adaptive whatsoever. I think some people will say that it's like, oh, you're just storing excess calories to use another time, but it's not adaptive to be like 300 pounds and barely be able to like get up off the couch. Um, you're gonna die in nature. Like you would not survive because you got to run away from whatever
Right.
is preying on you. So I really like to think about obesity as a failure at the level of the brain and the POMC system, and at the level of mitochondria as well, that can be easily navigated through optimizing the light environment, through getting enough morning sun and midday sun to optimize mitochondrial function and the POMC production, which can directly then through the alpha, beta, gamma, MSH work on the hypothalamus to regulate appetite and energy expenditure.
So when you're working with clients, like, personally, will you also, if you optimize their light environment, will you also, like, you know coach them on, like, caloric eating, or do you even worry about those things, or do you try to keep them on I mean, obviously they're, if they eat, 10,000 calories, that's still going to be a problem, right? At some level.
Well, I mean, a person who is healthy in the circadian and light sense, they would never eat 10,000 calories. They would be stuffed to the gills, especially
Hmm.
depending on what they're eating. So,
Right.
I mean, first of all, what I'd say is like the highly processed, hyperpalatable foods are not really food. So I
Hmm.
think when Jack talks about, food doesn't matter, he's talking about real food. So
Hmm.
assuming you're eating real food, then you can kind of eat whatever and however much you want because your body's going to naturally tell you when it's full, when it's had enough, or when you
Hmm.
need more. The problems come in when you're eating a lot of the hyperpalatable foods is that they hijack those centers in the brain that basically don't let you get full at the right time. And so that's where we get some issues of also energy in the absence of information. So that's
Hmm.
like pure energy when we're eating these hyperpalatable foods versus having the energy plus the information, which is the form of biophotons from food, but also in the form of different micronutrients and the ratios between different macro and micronutrients that help to inform your body what to do with the macros and with the energy that's coming in. So the information part of food is really important. And none of our processed foods have that because they're not grown under the sun. They're not grown under natural light. They're kind of stripped of their information that's going to allow the body to assimilate those nutrients properly. So that would be the only thing that I'm really coaching is that, I'm going to recommend eating seasonally when possible. Also, eating locally seasonally is highly beneficial from, like, let's say, a sustainability standpoint. Like, if we're trying to improve the health of our planet and our communities, then we want to support local because then we're not off off gassing pollution across the world in order to get the avocado to Boston in
Right.
the middle of winter, let's say.
Right.
So basically that would be the extent of it. I'm coaching like seasonal eating when possible,
Real food.
not real food only. And outside of that, like you don't have to count calories. You don't have to do any of that. We just have to dial in the basics so that your brain and body are on the same page with regards to, hey, I'm full, like I don't need any more food
Hmm.
versus I could use some more protein, etc. So I think there is maybe a bit of coaching as well in the protein area side of things. I think a lot of people aren't getting enough. And this maybe is my influence from Dr. Gabrielle, but I would say that in general, like making sure that we're getting enough protein is important from animal sources in particular because it also comes along with a whole heap of different micronutrients too. But from a satiety standpoint and like a gut brain axis standpoint and just overall energy and metabolic health, I think prioritizing protein in meals is like a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think getting people to eat real food is a great first step into the circadian world. I mean, I think, trying to get somebody, if you have a lousy if you have a lousy diet, if you have a lousy processed food diet, like circadian is going to help you, but you're not going to achieve, it's going to be slower. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's definitely beneficial, but I think to get all the way there, I think starting with real food is an important first step.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say there is that when you start getting, your morning sun and your midday sun, you'll naturally be less hungry and have less cravings because you're enhancing your baseline dopamine status via the endorphins that are produced from POMC cleavage via UV light in the brain and the skin. And when you're operating from a place of fullness, dopamine wise, you no longer need to reach for those little hits
Hmm.
of dopamine throughout the day, whether it's from your hyperpalatable foods, whether it's from binging on social media or watching junk TV or pornography or any drugs, alcohol, whatever people are addicted to. Addiction is really a sign of poor light environment that you're not sustaining a stable high dopamine level throughout the day from UV light exposure. If you're not getting that, you're basically your body is going to reach for something that will give it that dopamine hit, except the dopamine hits that it's going to search for are going to be things that aren't actually sustainable, that are going to burn you out over time and give you these like peaks and troughs of dopamine that then leave you wanting more and going back for another hit of it. So I think
So,
that's, I wouldn't even necessarily coach somebody to stop eating the processed foods
hmm.
first. Let's just get their light and their sun time dialed in and see what happens organically. I think
Hmm.
typically what I see is like people aren't that hungry anymore and they're gonna, maybe reach for better foods innately and maybe they'll even lose a taste for those hyperpalatable foods over time, which is definitely something that I've seen.
Because isn't dopamine a breakdown product of melanin?
Yeah, I mean it can be. So they share a common intermediate, well, a common precursor rather. Tyrosine and phenylalanine are both the precursors for dopamine and also for melanin. You can break down melanin to get L-dopa to make dopamine. You could also feasibly make dopamine directly from tyrosine. I would say it depends on the demand on the system, and also the health of or the maybe the stores of melanin that are present in the brain, specifically in like the substantia nigra, which is a primary dopamine producing part of the brain that's affected in Parkinson's disease. And we see in Parkinson's that melanin is lost in the substantia nigra, presumably to go towards dopamine synthesis because those neurons started to fail, likely because they weren't getting enough UV light that's actually stimulating the maintenance of those melanin pools that are in that part of the brain, but also elsewhere throughout the body. So I think I'm really excited to see where Parkinson's research goes, and hopefully I can contribute to that as well by leveraging cold, which stimulates UV biophoton production inside, as well as leveraging UV light from the outside. I think we could do major things to help improve quality of life and actually begin to like reverse the pathology as well. And I'm very motivated to do this as well because my uncle has Parkinson's, and so I'm in the process of putting together like an extensive protocol for him that hopefully we'll be able to scale as well and like begin to test in the lab.
Yeah, so UV light will actually help us build dopamine, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so we can actually eat UV light from the UV, obviously from the sun, which that's why, and blue light will actually destroy dopamine, right? On a
Yep.
very simple level, right? So our phones, our indoor lifestyle, our LED bulbs, just working inside actually crushes our dopamine. Cold actually creates UV light inside our bodies, right? So that
Yep.
actually helps us create dopamine and actually creates melanin on the inside, right? Through all those
Mhm.
pathways, right? Which I'm not quite smart enough to actually fully understand. But um, so you can actually let's talk about leveraging the sun and the cold and like how that works.
Yeah, so I think something I've spent a lot of time thinking about recently is like timing in general. So I think timing is really everything in biology and in life in general. Like there's a certain time to do things. For example, um you want good light exposure, you want sunlight exposure during the day. You don't want it at night. And thankfully nature has already set that up for us where we're getting light during the day and then darkness at night. And that system that's controlled by two inputs, light and dark, is allowing our bodies to know what time of day it is. And sorry, there's like a chopper going by. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can
no
hear
worries.
it.
No, I can't. I can't.
Oh, good. It's so loud. Oh my
Yeah.
God. So
I had my trash truck out here like earlier today, so
so the light and dark cycles are allowing our bodies to know what time of day it is, which is then allowing the system to know when it's time to do certain activities over others. And so we want to understand that in like multiple contexts too. Like, what's the best time to exercise? What's the best time to get cold? Um, what's the best time to eat certain meals? And so I
Mhm.
think thinking about the timing of the basics is a really interesting area that I'm still fleshing out myself. I would say, um, naturally, if we're living in an area that has seasons, we're naturally going to be exposed to cold in the wintertime and warmth and UV light in the summertime. And what most modern humans are doing is they're sitting in a no UV light environment, aka inside behind glass, with simultaneous exposure to warmer temperatures like 70 to 75 degrees.
Right.
And in nature, we'll virtually never encounter warm temperatures with no UV light. They typically go hand in hand. And we're meant to receive infrared light year round, despite what time of year it is. And the indoor environment is completely devoid of UV and infrared light. So the glass is coated to prevent the infrared light because it's energy efficient.
Right.
And I had a post a couple weeks ago saying like energy efficiency and technology is creating an energy crisis in the human body because of the disdain for UV and infrared light within tech because it's seen as like waste product because it's not contributing to the visible light spectrum. Moreover, infrared light, aka heat, is seen as like something that's not desirable because it's going to contribute to like the thermal environment, which if you're, let's say, trying to air condition your home, you know, most people don't want that infrared light to come through the window and then heat up the home, and then they have to spend more money on air conditioning, for example, versus just embracing the temperatures of the season, which is imparting the intelligence of nature into your system, and your system knows how to work with that. Also, kind of a side note, but sweating, which you would often do in warm temperatures, is a really powerful way to deplete deuterium from the system because sweat is essentially water pulled from the bloodstream. The bloodstream is the most concentrated
Hmm.
source of deuterium in the system. Basically, I have to look more into this research, but Jack talks about this a lot, which is really interesting that when you squeeze down deuterium in like the very small blood vessels, it can actually create UV light as well, which is super interesting. But that's just to say that deuterium is important in the bloodstream, but you want it as far away as possible from the mitochondria because deuterium can't fit through the ATP synthase rotor that is required to make ATP. And so if it gets in there, it starts to gunk it up essentially and clog the system, which can create mitochondrial dysfunction. And we see that in dysfunctional mitochondria, deuterium begins accumulating, which is both a sign and an exacerbator of mitochondrial dysfunction. But anyway, because the blood is concentrated in deuterium and sweat comes from the bloodstream, you're essentially specifically pulling out deuterium enriched water from your system. And then that can establish a new equilibrium where deuterium is being pulled out of cells back into the bloodstream to reestablish equilibrium. And that's going to ultimately deuterium deplete your cells. So sweating is super important. I'm still thinking a decent amount about the timing of cold and food. So in my podcast, my second podcast with Jack, we talked about how eating food, like eating your main meals when there's no UV light present, is likely the prudent way to do things because UV light will naturally inhibit your appetite and increase your energy expenditure. Essentially, that's going to happen the most if you have melanin in your skin to harness that UV light because melanin can split water and can generate free electrons, which can then basically feed your mitochondria. So if you are melanated enough on your surface, you're essentially eating the sun when you're just simply getting, your skin in the game, as Jack would say. So
That's
if
a
you're,
wild thought, and it's
it
actually,
is.
it's pretty cool that you can actually like, power yourself from you're solar powered.
Yeah, and also from the earth too, getting your bare feet on the
Mm.
earth also gives you access to free electrons. And so when you're accessing electrons from other areas, you need less food. And that should naturally reflect at the level of your appetite. You shouldn't feel as hungry.
Mhm.
And conversely, during the wintertime when there's less UV light, you need more food to power your metabolism to create the metabolic heat that's needed to sustain your body temperature throughout the winter. But most people actually never give themselves cold stress to actually engage that system. So we're kind of just doing things very backwards, and it ultimately stems back to our ignorance around the importance of temperature, hot and cold, the importance of UV and infrared light in regulating metabolism and mitochondrial function. And once we can begin to understand these different inputs as important variables in the system, we can begin to re-engineer these important inputs into our life again.
Hmm. Yeah. So, um, yeah, it's a couple different. It's like, it's. I remember that I actually mentioned to somebody the other day, like the few months ago, like we actually don't need food. Like we can actually get enough. I mean, our mitochondria don't actually sense that we eat glucose. I mean, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. All they see is electrons, and that's all they know. And so however they get those electrons, they don't really care, right? I guess that kind of goes along with the research of like, the fasting research that you don't actually have to eat. If you just drink water, you can. I mean, there's a time when you will slowly waste away to nothing, but I mean, it takes a long time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I especially would be really curious to see some studies done on fasting because most people, when they're fasting, they're doing it inside. They're not like spending
Yeah.
time in the sun with their bare feet on the ground. Another thing I really want to see is bed rest studies done with natural light. So, like putting people on
Mm.
bed rest outside under natural light, because I'd be willing to bet that even older adults, if we put them in that natural light condition, that we'd be able to protect their muscle dramatically from muscle loss versus a lot of the bed rest studies, which are done under fluorescent or LED lights. We see muscle loss happen very radically and rapidly in people like, let's say, over 65, even from just 7 days of bed rest, they can lose like over 10% of their muscle mass.
Right.
So imagine we could protect that by simply changing the light environment by providing the infrared light that can directly penetrate into the tissue and support mitochondrial function, even during sedentary behavior. And that's another thing. Like people will talk about sedentary behavior as this really, bad thing. And I think it's absolutely like one of the worst things you can do is be sedentary inside under artificial light.
Mm.
But I'd be willing to bet that if we have sedentary people just do whatever they're going to do inside, outside, that they would be highly protected metabolically.
Yeah, that is really an interesting. I think that would be an interesting study. You could actually, it would actually be ethical to do. I mean, there's nothing that's, unethical about it. I mean, open windows in a
Hmm.
nursing home, right? I mean, that's you could actually figure that out, right? And
Yeah, so
to
I think we need to do that, especially because there's certain populations that really need the support, and they're just in nursing homes, like most of them don't get out for more than like 5-10 minutes per week. It's insane.
Mhm.
Like they're not getting any natural light. And in hospitals, it's the same way. I see hospitals as the absolute last place you would want to go to heal, which is
Yeah.
just bonkers. Like I don't
Mhm.
know where the left turn was that we just went wrong, but we got to do something about it because our
Well,
system is essentially failing us.
you can't even open a window in most
They're
hospitals.
bolted shut.
Yeah, they're bolted shut. Yeah, so part of my what was interesting when I found Uncle Jack's work, and started learning about mitochondrial function, about the circadian biology, and you know he mentioned something about and I actually did a podcast with him, and I think everybody should go listen to it. But he actually talked about sleep apnea, and his ideas around sleep apnea are very interesting. And I've had some feedback. So a lot of people are like, it's a pretty scientific, heavy podcast, and so there's lots of people who um like Doug, I don't even know what he was talking about, right? And so there's the idea behind like all of our mitochondria make like ROS, or reactive oxygen species, and reactive nitrogen species, right? So those are free radicals, right? And so that the free radicals are what, are antioxidants actually when we take or supplements, vitamin supplements, they're there to squash the free radicals. The problem is that our mitochondria actually make free radicals in normal, magnetochemical reactions, right? So they actually make ATP, and they actually make free radicals as energy. And so you need the normally functioning mitochondria actually does make ROS and RNS, which are like reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species. The problem is that when the mitochondrial function gets slows down, or disintegrates a little bit, they actually get a buildup of reactive oxygen species. Is that correct? Is that how you understand it too?
Well, kind of. So what can end up
Or do I have it
happening?
wrong?
No, no, you're mostly right. I'm just gonna add a little bit of nuance, and that's that when mitochondrial membrane potential drops, which is a sign that basically less electrons are being pumped through the electron transport chain. Um, Essentially that can make the mitochondria more leaky. And so the ROS that were then localized to mitochondria can begin escaping into the extra mitochondrial
Hmm.
environment and other parts of the cell. ROS are extremely important signaling metabolites that are in mitochondria, but they're meant to really be localized to that environment. And because so oxygen, which is the terminal electron acceptor in mitochondria, is paramagnetic, meaning that it basically draws a magnetic field. And so it's going to pull these ROS towards it. But if we're in a hypoxic state, or we're in a state where our mitochondria aren't functioning well, now that magnetism is essentially going to be depleted because we're no longer either having sufficient levels of oxygen within the mitochondria to draw that magnetic field, or we have a lower membrane potential, which is allowing the ROS to leak out into the other parts of the cell. And now we can get issues with lipid peroxides and other reactive species that are formed in response to the reaction of these ROS and RNS with molecules that aren't really supposed to be interacting with them. It can change the way that enzymes are behaving. It can change the reactivity of different lipid species, and it can essentially create an inflammatory environment at the level of a single cell.
Hmm. And so then the idea of like, apnea, or the idea of like stopping breathing, is the idea of protecting the cells from adding too much oxygen to the system if the ROS are leaking out of the membranes, basically. That's one theory that I think we definitely need some more study on. And I don't know if that's actually being done.
Well, actually, one thing that I was thinking of when I was listening to your guys' episode, I listened to it like 3 times, and I was thinking, do we know that? Do we know if there's like a lower incidence of sleep apnea at altitude, like places like Denver? Are there less sleep apnea cases? I feel like that's something easy that we should be able to know, because if there's a lower oxygen in the ambient environment, then you would think, if this hypothesis is true, that also they should have lower rates of sleep apnea because their oxygen's already being depleted.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that's something we need to look up. I mean, I think that would be an interesting, um, well, I mean, I think it's a really complex problem. I think it's a real, like all chronic diseases, I think they're all complex, and I think they all have multiple layers that I think need to be explored. And there isn't every single person has an N of one, and I don't think anyone is going to, there's any one thing that's going to solve every single human um in in that way. Um I mean, I have lots of patients who love their CPAP machine and they seem to do well. And I mean, I'm not going to tell any of them to stop. I have lots of patients who can't wear them and don't wear them and are just out there floundering trying to figure out what to do. But I think, I think it's an interesting I think there's lots of people that just aren't sleeping. They're not apneic, but they just don't sleep. I mean, I think there's a whole section of those people. I mean, there's lots of middle-aged people who sleep for 3, 4 hours a night, and then they toss and turn for another 2 or 3, and then and then they get up and move on with their day. And I mean, I think that's chronic bad sleep is just a thing. And I think airway. I think there are some people who literally can't breathe. There are some people who have such big things. Is the circadian is the mitochondrial function part of that? I think potentially it possibly is. I think there is some validity to what Uncle Jack says there. I don't, I'm not ready to go out on a limb and say that it's the gospel yet, but I think it's definitely something that we need to look into for sure more.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at people on, it would be pretty easy to do the study if you look at people who are on CPAP machines who are diagnosed with sleep apnea and you look at their mitochondrial heteroplasmy in different tissues, for example, we'll probably end up seeing that, they're operating from like a lesser place than somebody who's metabolically healthy, maybe who doesn't have CPAP, who's younger. We probably have to adjust for age. And I think it's definitely really interesting. I mean, the more I learn, the more I think the brain is really up to a lot. Like it's really like the central controller of everything. So even if like somebody has sleep apnea because I don't know, they have enlarged tonsils and maybe their tongue isn't sitting right and depending on their position, it's like blocking their airway. Well, maybe that's actually a brain thing too
Hmm.
because maybe the tongue isn't being held in the right position and that could be a neurological phenomenon as well. So I think it definitely goes really deep. We need more research. I do think I think of him as kind of like a prophet. He's always ahead of his time. And I think
Hmm.
it's just, he's a great hypothesis generating engine that people just need
Yes.
to go do the research and like
Right.
prove it.
Yeah. I mean, I think on so many levels, I think it makes so much sense. It's a heavy, again, it's a, unfortunately in centralized, healthcare. I mean, the fix is not monetary, right? So trying to get the research to be done because the fix doesn't require, you know, you can't there's nothing to sell, right? There's no device to sell. There's no drug to sell. There's no it's literally melanin, melanate yourself and improve your mitochondrial water. I mean, that's pretty much that's how Jack would solve it. I mean, there's a couple people I found on Twitter, I mean, who, ends of one. I mean, these are ends of one. These are not like, this isn't like Doug's research. These are just, but a couple guys, I mean, they solved their sleep apnea just by doubling their time in the sun. I mean, obviously they live at the equator, but they pretty much, they've, that's what they've, that's what they're claiming right now. So, I mean, I think I've come 180 degrees. I mean, I do believe that before we people embark on major, dental, airway problems, to fix their sleep apnea. I think some thought needs to go into the circadian biology and tongue function and everything else first. It doesn't mean that people don't need these things. I think they will need these things, but I think maximizing your sun time, maximizing your circadian biology is definitely some place that people should start.
Yeah, because it is at this foundational level and the more we can focus at that level, the more knock-on effects, like positive knock-on effects you can have throughout the rest of your life. And then you can also see like once this stuff is dialed in for an extended period of time, if there are still issues at play, then it's like, okay, we can feel more comfortable addressing those, maybe in different ways. But
Hmm.
until we get to that point, it's really hard to say what is at the root of the issues, you know?
Right. And I think that's the frustration because I think we're still in a, infancy in learning about, mitochondrial function and about what all these things mean. And, it really is a reset for most of us, I think. And I think that's the interesting part of it, right?
Mm-hmm. It is. I'm really grateful actually that I've well, I guess I've kind of teed myself up in this way on like through my business and my brand that I'm just always going to share what's true to me at the moment and what's making sense for me in a moment versus a lot of people build brands and businesses around one way of doing things. And then the moment they get new information to the contrary of what they're doing, it's like they rigidify and they don't want to address it because it feels like they don't want to be wrong and they don't want to admit they had been wrong before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think, we're always just like doing the best we can with the information we have, and we should be adaptable and be willing to consider new information when it presents itself. And that doesn't mean that, you're necessarily wrong. It's more like half truths and how we can evolve over time. I think it's a really pointless endeavor to just think that you have everything right and then it's just going to be that way forever. I think that's also a boring way to live. Like I always am learning something new every single
Right.
day. And that excites me tremendously. I'm not worried about like, oh, the stuff I was saying 2 years ago that looks so bad now. I would never say
Mhm.
that anymore. It's more like, no, I'm just like evolving as a person, and we're all
Yeah.
just doing what we can, and just being honest about that. I think is really important.
I mean, I think that's exactly where I'm at too. I mean, I don't want to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater, but I also want to at least to try to address like some of the my own like what I thought was right or what I thought was correct a couple years ago. There's nuance to it now, and there's some things I like to add to that, and realize that I don't have all the answers, and anyone who says they have all the answers, I think is those are the people I start to question because we have way more to learn in all of this space, and I think hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years we actually start to get some answers about many of these chronic diseases that we're trying to manage and people are trying to manage, and that maybe one day people can actually start to heal from.
Yeah. One thing I really like to think, and I don't remember who said this quote. I think I made a post on this at some point, but it was like, you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to know how to think.
Hmm.
Because if you know how to think about problems, then you can come to solutions and answers naturally. And I think that's really where connecting with nature comes into play too, because if you can start to think about things in a first principles manner through looking at what nature's doing, it opens up this whole wellspring of insights into how our bodies are functioning too, and like the fractal nature of reality. And when you can see pattern in one area, you can then kind of see how it's mirrored other places. And I think studying nature and just how studying how animals behave in nature and what
Hmm.
happens in natural environments can provide us with such important wisdom about our own bodies as well, and how we can live in a more optimal manner.
Yeah, like watching my dog. My dog always wants to go out in the middle of in the summer and just sit in the sun for like, an hour. And then
Yes.
when it's too hot, it goes in the shade. It's like I mean, that's how we should be. So how do you handle like your clients? Obviously women are worried about like wrinkles and about like,
Mhm.
aging spots and age spots and, keeping their, makeup and sunscreens and things like that. How do you handle your clients? How do you handle those?
So I
Because
always think it's
because people will say, like I have to have my SPF on or whatever.
Yeah, I always think it's funny that the people who are so concerned about damage from the sun will sit inside blasting themselves with artificial light, which is inherently aging just by its nature. So, like we talked about a little bit earlier, blue light in isolation, which is the way we're finding it in the context of all of our device screens, our LED and fluorescent, like our white LED and fluorescent bulbs, they all have very big peaks in the blue light part of the spectrum, and they're completely absent in the red and
Right.
infrared part of the spectrum, which we're always meant to receive blue with an abundance of red and infrared. That's how we receive it in nature from the sun. But when we receive blue light without that red and infrared light, it directly impairs mitochondrial function on our skin, our eyes, and our proximal brain regions that has many knock-on effects throughout the body. And when you impair mitochondrial function, you're impairing the production of deuterium depleted metabolic water that's actually required to facilitate an anti-aging or rejuvenating effect at the cellular level. So the worst thing you can do from an aging standpoint is to blast yourself with artificial light. I would say the
Hmm.
best thing you can do from an aging standpoint is get lots of morning sun, get enough midday sun to optimize your vitamin D biomarker to greater than 60 nanograms per milliliter, and then spend time in the shade outside as much time as you can. I think, and obviously grounding and everything like that
Hmm.
too, and blocking blue light at night, putting filters on your device screens, using red bulbs if you have to use light at night, or candles. That's going to be the best thing you can do from an aging standpoint at the cellular level. I think a
Hmm.
lot of what we've been sold societally with regards to like skin aging, honestly, we need to repeat the studies with blue light because there's even evidence to show now that blue light in isolation can cause skin cancer.
Mm.
And we're exposed to a ton of blue light in isolation
Hmm.
compared to UV light in isolation. Almost nobody's exposed to that.
Right.
And so I think the blue light in isolation studies is actually highly more influential and informative than the UV light in isolation studies. And so we should all be alarmed at the results of those studies because everybody's inundated with artificial blue light basically 24/7. Some people
Right.
even sleep with the TV on. And so this is a real epidemic that we have that's going to age our systems far more than anything else because it's inherently damaging and creating dysfunction at the level of mitochondria. And mitochondria are what's setting our age, essentially. If you look at mitochondrial heteroplasmy, it increases about 10% per decade. And so if you look at somebody who's young versus somebody who's old, the old person has a lot of mutation burden in their mitochondria. They're making way less metabolic water. The deuterium depleted metabolic water, their deuterium levels are elevated compared to somebody who's young, has much more deuterium depleted water, healthier mitochondria that have a higher membrane potential, that have lower mutation rates. And so we should be striving societally to make our mitochondria younger and to function like younger mitochondria would. And in order to do that, we need to get back out into natural environments. That's the best way to support them.
Mhm. Yeah, because the red light actually it actually hits the cytochrome C, right? And so that actually helps, keep that going and the electron
Mm-hmm.
transport chain, right? So sitting in the shade actually gives you that. So
Yep.
I mean, the
Yep.
whole
The
idea,
whole
I mean, yeah. So the whole idea
uh,
behind photobiomodulation. So it's a big thing in the pain space and dentists use photobiomodulation like lasers. I mean, and the reality is like you don't need any fancy pants light. You really just need the sun. Like there's really nothing magic about photobiomodulation. It's all the wavelengths of light are literally coming from the sun. Like you don't.
yeah. And even more than that, so most photobiomodulation will have like 4 wavelengths of red and infrared at most, typically. In nature, you have a continuous spectrum of wavelengths. So let's say on a PBM device, you've got 680, 660, 680, 720, and 810. 4 wavelengths. In nature, when you're getting light from the sun, you have 660, 661, 662, all the way up through
Right.
3100 in the
Right.
like getting into the far infrared. So you're getting all of those wavelengths at one time at a pretty high dose
Right.
versus in the PBM, you're getting maybe 4 wavelengths at a decently high dose, but the total dose, if you were to sum up all of the dose across all of those wavelengths from like 600 up through like 3000, the dose you're getting is far more significant from the sun. And that's the way we should be doing it. We're meant to receive all of those wavelengths at one time. That's the way to optimally stimulate mitochondrial function and cytochrome C oxidase and helping to support essentially the flow of electrons through the electron transport chain. That's not only making energy, but is also making this really important form of water that's special.
Mhm. Do we know that there are certain mitochondria that actually sense for the different wavelengths, or do they all pretty much react, to all of them in some way? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
so I think the chromophores, it's not just like one wavelength that absorbs, it's typically a spectrum on both sides that it will be reacting to. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of our studies, of course, are done with specific wavelengths of light. We're
Hmm.
not looking at the effect on like from natural light, for example. So that's also something I'm hoping to solve in my lab where we're studying actually direct sunlight. But yeah, I think we just have a lot to learn because we're just so reductionist in our approach in science that we want to study specific wavelengths instead of studying the light that we're kind of meant to be
Right.
exposed to in the
Right.
ancestral evolutionary environment. I think we're gonna just basically have to repeat a bunch of studies in natural light.
Right. I mean, it was interesting that paper that came out just recently about the, Alzheimer's, was it the, yeah, dementia and like night at light,
Yeah.
the light in the, the light in the, that we every city has basically like coming in the windows. Like it's a very interesting study that like, more people, that blackout curtains are probably a good idea, you know?
Absolutely. There's definitely a bunch of things that people can do if they live in unsavory environments, like in urban environments. But ultimately, I think the more people get red pilled on this, the more they're going to want to get out of cities and
Yeah.
kind of just get some more space and have some green space that they have access to daily. And just, I don't know. I feel like the light story is like a gateway drug into the whole like optimizing all areas of health. I think getting chickens is also a way to do it. There's
Right.
through the diet, like the food gurus, that's one path to get there as well. Like there's many paths, but I think ultimately they all lead to the same place, which is like trying to cultivate as much sovereignty and autonomy we can in our lives to make responsible decisions for our health and the health of our families. And many people just aren't getting to that point yet because we're brought up in this system where we're supposed to treat doctors, experts, authority figures as like this father figure that we're supposed to just listen to without questioning.
Right.
And I think we're really outgrowing that system societally. I think it's happening very slowly, and some of us have, kind of been there ahead
Right.
of time. But um, ultimately, it is kind of scary because it comes back to like, no one can really help you but you. There are no
Right.
shortcuts. And of course, modern medicine is here to save you in a pinch and is great in acute settings. But when it comes to creating health in the long term, you actually have to do the legwork in order to make that happen for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really the take home, right? It's like I think um, you know, our so for sure like chronic diseases are not, we don't have a lot of great answers for them. There's virtually none in the system. And so it really comes down to environment at some level. So that comes down to food, comes down to all of these different things. And it's just like, it's very difficult for the normal person to just navigate, right? I think that's the challenge, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've become very disconnected from our intuitions and our like inner wisdom that would guide us, but instead we're constantly looking outside of us for the answers. But a lot of this stuff is extremely intuitive, and especially once you just start spending more time out in the sun, out in nature, I feel like you just get more downloads and have a closer connection to like the wellspring of information that we each all have access to that's just like inborn within us, and being able to have enough, I guess, courage to follow that voice is important. And I think the voice also gets louder the more time you spend outside in nature in the sun, and it
Hmm.
becomes harder to ignore. And so I think, I mean, in some ways, the system has leveraged that by keeping us indoors on screens, easily programmable, easily influenced and manipulated, that we're constantly deferring our choice making and responsibility to the experts versus understanding that, you're really the only person who can make the best decisions for you, and getting back to a place where you feel a sense of confidence and calm being able to follow that voice, I think is really important.
And I think a lot of it too, though, is like, we like a comfortable life, right?
Yeah.
People have, it's comfortable sitting inside in the air conditioning. It's not comfortable. I mean, I live in the desert, so I live in Vegas, which is Uncle Jack's, favorite place. Um, because literally no magnetism, no water, it's like whatever. And I totally understand. I totally get what he's saying. I mean, I think he's spot on. But I mean, I'll come home during lunch and sit outside in 105, and like people are like, actually sit outside in 105. I'm like, yeah, I sit outside at 105. I mean, it's like, I mean, just like you would if you were in New Jersey in the middle of winter, you're gonna go sit outside. Like, you may not sit outside all day, but you're gonna go sit outside because that's like humans are supposed to, even the Eskimos, like they live in igloos, but they spend their time outside.
Hmm.
I'm not saying the Eskimos like live in igloos now. I'm saying you know, but I mean, I think, I think most of us are supposed to be outside, as much as you possibly can. And I think our indoor lifestyle is definitely hampered like our health at this point.
It has. I mean, I can definitely sympathize on one hand because we as a species lived in discomfort for a very long time. And now that we've gotten to a place technologically where we've created comfort, I think it's like anything else. When you don't have something, when you finally get the thing, you enjoy it for a period of time, but then eventually you get kind of bored and outgrow the thing. And I think we're kind of going through that process now where we're realizing that um we have to re-engineer
Mm-hmm.
discomfort into our lives. And it's like kind of like Jordan Peterson talks about actually, where you actually have to voluntarily approach things that make you uncomfortable, like
Hmm.
forthrightly. And that actually allows you to engage your dopamine and norepinephrine systems that actually gives you the positive hormetic response to the stimulus.
Right.
Versus if you are a victim to your life and everything is uncomfortable and you're not actually like courageously approaching the things that are making you uncomfortable, that actually creates extreme harm on your system,
Right.
and basically is like burning you out and breaking you down. So it's really important. And this also comes back to the life story too, because you have to have a healthy dopamine system online to be able to actually have the confidence and courage to do hard things in your life.
Right.
And then you get rewarded for it. And that reward allows you to continue doing more hard things because biochemically your body's saying, yes, more of that. We want more of that
Right.
versus being just a victim to your circumstances, you're never getting that reward because you're not actually living in the present. You're actually more so just kind of either in a state of depression or anxiety about the future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I like that. I mean, I think that's, you know, I think you hit on all the things that I'm actually was looking to get out of you today.
Yay!
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, I think it's a really you know, I was going to ask you about the leptin-melanocortin pathway, but I mean, I think we kind of hit on it already. I mean, I think, I think we kind of nailed that down. I really think most of my listeners would gloss over on the leptin-melanocortin pathway, you know.
Yeah, I'm actually still studying that too because more recently, like I think in 2020, the whole model in the centralized paradigm shifted around that. And so there's like an old model and a new model. So maybe we can just record a separate episode on just that topic and we can go through, compare, contrast the old and the new model and integrate Uncle Jack's perspective on this as well. I think that could be really like
Yeah.
fruitful.
No, I think that would be actually helpful, But I think, one thing that I've actually tried to synthesize is melatonin production, right? So I think back to the sleep story. I mean, because that's kind of where my brain lives right now. And all of this stuff, I mean, just so the viewer knows, I mean, all of this stuff does relate to like dental disease. Like the microbiome in the mouth is exactly the same as we call it the oral microbiome, but the microbiome in the mouth is a subset of the whole microbiome. It's all connected. It's all one piece. So anything that happens in the mouth can actually happen in the gut and vice versa. We find gut bacteria in the mouth frequently. I do think circadian biology actually does affect the oral microbiome. So I do think the circadian biology is related to gum disease. It is related to tooth decay. It is related to, bruxism is still another one that, it's kind of elusive out there. We don't really understand that 100%. But I mean, all of these things they are kind of related. And I think, you think about melatonin production, I mean, that starts the day that at sunrise. Like you start creating melatonin for the next night's sleep at sunrise. So if you're having trouble sleeping, you know, melatonin production begins at sunrise, and as much time during the day. And then blue light destroys melatonin. So it's like, if you don't sleep, start looking at like, that's what I do. I mean, start looking at like, getting your melatonin production going and stop the breakdown of it before you go to sleep.
Yeah. Oh, regarding bruxism, you should actually have Rua on your podcast. I think you guys would have a really good chat, but there's definitely a quantum biological approach to this, but he often talks about the postural approach to this, which is essentially if you're not getting good molar contact, like we talked about before the podcast, where you need molar contact to be just right, not having malocclusion or crossbite essentially, in order for your body to properly sense the ground, that grinding is actually an attempt of your body to ground itself
Hmm.
due to like a poor bite. So I think that's something you could talk about. Also, I definitely see like bruxism and grinding in people with parasite infections. So it's likely related to the serotonin system as well. Serotonin also increases like parasite motility. And that also varies with the times of or the phases of the moon rather. So
Hmm.
at the full moon, the worm eggs in particular in the gut will hatch, and the worms are most active because the ratio of serotonin to melatonin is increased. And that also tends to drive symptomology as well when people with parasite infections. So they might grind more so around the full moon versus around the new moon, for example. And it's just really interesting. I mean, I think everybody knows that the moon cycles, like the term lunatic was basically made
Right.
because the full moon can essentially modulate this ratio of serotonin to melatonin by the pineal gland, create more erratic behavior. And we know the moon has this incredible effect on the waters of the planet. Well, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it also has an effect on the waters of our body as well. And it should not be difficult by extension to understand like the sun is the most important source of light, on our planet, in our environments, that's regulating so much. And yeah, so I don't know. I think there's a lot of intuition around this that historically we have acknowledged as a species that we've kind of lost and kind of poo-pooed the ancestral wisdom around it. And most cultures before ours worship the sun.
Mhm.
And somehow we just think we're beyond and better than that now. But I think we're slowly but surely rediscovering a lot of this ancient wisdom. And it's like, how did they even know this stuff? A lot of the things is like pretty striking and incredible. And so I think the more we start kind of embracing our the wisdom of our ancestors, let's say,
Hmm.
the more we can integrate it with our modern understanding and create a synthesis that's something that's like a beautiful fusion of both.
Hmm. So, how common in your research did you find out how common are parasite infections?
Not too uncommon, honestly, because we encounter parasites a lot in our environments, and typically in the US, like the CDC, for example, would consider worms like a third world problem. And it's just not the case at all. Like if you're walking around barefoot, if you're eating fresh foods, you're exposed to parasites. And so I also really have a lot of disdain for people who are on social media, for example, telling you have to avoid parasites because if you're living a healthy lifestyle, you actually will encounter parasites. So
Hmm.
avoiding them is not really the issue. We have a lot of barriers in our body to prevent parasite infections. Parasites can pass through us without creating an infection.
Hmm.
Problem is, if we have poor stomach acid production, which is also dictated by circadian rhythm, it's dictated by respiration mechanics, it's dictated by your sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system balance, it's dictated by definitely specific drugs. That stomach acid is a major protector against parasite infection because it can basically denature and like neutralize any parasites coming in through the diet. We also have the immune system. So the immune system is also, of course, on a circadian rhythm. The immune system is looking for parasites. There's an innate and an adaptive immune system. Primarily, the innate immune system is dealing with parasites. If that innate cellular immunity is off due to aberrations in circadian biology, or again, chronic stress, high cortisol over time due to poor light environments and excess blue light, then our immune system can also, be at one of the pillars that's down. And so, you can think about the modern environment where most people are walking around stressed out all the time. They probably have inadequate stomach acid for a variety of reasons. Their immune systems may be shot due to, whether it's drug exposures or just not getting out in nature enough and having poor light environments. So we're kind of basically cutting ourselves off at the knees in multiple domains. Also, the skin. So the skin is a major barrier against parasites. If the skin barrier becomes weakened because we're eating a lot of processed foods and processed seed oils, because we're under a lot of artificial blue light that's impairing skin barrier function and mitochondrial function, now we're basically, all the domains that we have natural protection against parasites for are being compromised. And then we can get parasite infections, even if you're like, let's say, an upper middle class,
Hmm.
middle aged or young person in the US, like you can still have a parasite issue
Hmm.
if all of these different domains are being impacted. So I think it's pretty common. I've seen many parasite infections coming through my practice, and I have like protocols for that as well. But we really need to dial in the basics again because the basics are what helps to protect against the infection. If there is an infection, we also need to deal with that actively because, if it's already there, then that's one thing. But
Right.
now we can protect against future infections by really just nailing the pillars of health.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I don't want to take more of your time. I really appreciate this hour or so.
It's fun.
It was fun. Yeah. I mean, we hit on a few topics that I think are interesting. I mean, definitely you know, cleared up a few things for me. I would like to, it'd be fun to do another one and talk about the whole leptin melano,
Let's do it.
talk about the before and after that because it's still a little fuzzy to me. I know it's one of Uncle Jack's claims to fame, and it really is the idea behind Ozempic, I guess, right? I mean, I think that's the GLP-1, with the GLP-1 whatever they knock it out. I mean, I'm a dentist, I'm not an obesity doctor,
Yeah,
so
the GLP-1 agonists, they activate the receptors, the GLP-1 receptors
yeah,
that are active in the brain that actually can increase energy expenditure and decrease appetite. It's basically never, you never want to eat anything essentially. And
yeah,
um,
kind of knocks out the whole pathway, right?
yeah, it's basically short circuiting the pathway. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that in the next one. I think it's
Yeah, let's do it again.
important conversation.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you, Alexis. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Enjoy your cold plunge. How often are you cold plunging every day
So
or
I've
every week?
more so
What are you
been
doing?
doing, I've recently switched to doing like 3 or 4 large, like longer sessions per week versus a
Hmm.
bunch of mini sessions per day.
Hmm.
Which I think is good. I'm still experimenting with what's like the right timing and dosing for me, so I'll keep you posted on that, but I'm really, really enjoying it. I think it's pretty life-changing.
I think it definitely is an N of one for sure. Yeah, I think it takes you a little time to figure out. Like I've been doing it for the last couple of weeks. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a interesting. It's a well, I mean, I started cold plunging last January in my pool, and I started doing like 2 or 3 minutes, and it does improve my sleep. So I'm a little bit of an insomniac. So it definitely does improve my insomnia for sure. I mean, so I no longer really, go to bed at 10 and wake up at 2 and then wonder if I'm going to get back to sleep. I mean, usually I'll sleep all the way to get 5 or 6 hours and
That's
sometimes
great.
7 or 8. So for me, it's for my N of one, it works. I think there's definitely something to it. I mean, Tom Seeger's work is legendary as far as like his cold plunge research, and his papers that he comes up with are really you know, they're impressive. Let's put it that way.
They are.
And even
Yeah, I love him.
Dr. Jack's cold thermogenesis protocols are pretty legendary too. So there's definitely
Hmm.
value in cold plunging, I think. I mean, obviously we're not going to go into like the hows and whys right here, but I definitely think there's value to it for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, we can maybe talk about it next time too. There's a whole lot of benefits to cold, um, that we can get into. It'll probably be like an hour conversation itself.
I know we could actually just talk about cold because I mean I think cold is it's a it's a it has way more benefits than I mean I came growing up when I was like a little kid, like don't go out and get in the cold, you're gonna catch cold, and it's like
Oh, yeah.
like
Couldn't be farther from the truth.
like the old wives' tale, like if you really want to get better, just get in the cold, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
thank you, Alexis. I
All
really
right,
appreciate
thank
this. Let's
you.
do this again. This was
Let's
fun.
do it.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Bye.
Bye.